Starting. Hopefully. Here we go. Okay, so thank you very much, Shelley, for joining us today. Ben and I have worked out that you are number 7 of our victims that we've been chatting with. So we've been enjoying this as well. So for people that are listening, I'm Janine Pipe. I'm a writer, editor, reviewer, booktuber, a little bit of everything. And Ken from Silver Shamrock got in touch with me and asked if Ben and I could do a series of interviews with the different authors as they've got the books coming out this year. So that's me, and I am joined as always by the lovely Ben.
Hey, I'm Ben, book reviewer, blogger, writer, writing mostly for Puzzle Box Horror and my own site, readingvicariously.net.
Thank you. And we are joined today by Shelly Campbell. So thank you very much for joining us. And you're in Canada, that's right?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. So have you just gone back into a big lockdown over there, or has something? I keep seeing different people are like saying, "Oh, we're trapped indoors again." What's been happening?
We have. It depends on what province you're in and how well your province is at following the rules. But
yes.
We're not as locked down as some of the other provinces. But yes, they recently shut down the schools again here.
Right.
And the kids were home for a few weeks online schooling, but they're back in this week. So they're very happy about that.
I'm sure.
So it seems like we keep riding the waves, going in and out of lockdowns, but more and more people getting vaccinated here, so that's good.
Excellent. Yeah, good news. Okay, Shelley, thank you. What can you tell us about yourself? So a little bit about who Shelley Campbell is and also your career as a writer.
I grew up here in Alberta. We're pretty close, tucked into the Rockies. I was a farm girl growing up, so we did a lot of farming and then kind of downsized to what we called kindergarten farms, or we call it, because we were joking that there were small farms, that it wasn't even real farming anymore. And then eventually, when I had my kids, we downsized even more, and it's my first time living in town. I've had a career in the oil field, worked a lot of night shifts, and night shifts on anything I find, for me, has always been really conducive to writing, because that's when you can come up with some of your wackiest ideas, and your mind's in a little bit different frame on those long hours before dawn. So I've always written since I was a kid, but probably had a story that stuck with me since around high school. I didn't pick it up again until my kids were older. And it was kind of like picking up and putting down a novel. If you haven't read it forever, you'd pick it up after years and be like, I don't even remember did I write this? What's going on here? Sort of thing. So finally got serious about finishing that a few years ago, published it. It's called Under the Lesser Moon. It's my debut grimdark fantasy, and it got published in November. And then kind of got encouraged and thought, okay, well, yeah, some people like it. It got published, and I want to keep doing this. And while I was working on Under the Lesser Moon, started working on Golf, which started as a short story prompt and kind of just carried on from there.
Wow. Awesome. Where was that something that you were like, the short story prompt, was that something that you were joining in with, like a book club or something, or where did that come from?
It was just on an online writing group, and it was one of those like short little sentence prompts for like a short story. And all the prompt was there's a locked door and your main character is the one that finds the key. What's behind the locked door? And so it just kind of went from there. So of course there was some really cool entries because it's wide open for what you could do with that. But that's where I kind of got the first idea for the short story for Golf. And then it kept calling back to me. I'm like, I want to spend more time with this character. I think there's more you could do this that you didn't have time for in a short story.
So was it published as a short story, or was it just that you wrote a short story and then
just wrote it and sat in the dusty files of my computer?
Well, that's really interesting, and it happens a lot for writers as well. I know that you write something and you've got like just 5,000 words or something. You look at it and you think, this character deserves more time, and I'm invested in this person now, and I need to do more. And it's a really good I find that drabbles can be the same as well. You know, when you've just got those 100 words, but actually when you've written those 100 words and you're like, oh, I've got, that's now sparked off this idea and I can do so much more with that. It's really good practice as well for exercises and things. So that's really interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, that's cool. I'm glad you ended up seeing more in David, because I mean what you ended up writing is awesome. I got a copy of it right here, Gulf, just so people can see the cover if they haven't seen it. So we're gonna get into and talk a little bit about the book, trying to avoid spoilers, of course. But starting off, just what can you tell us about this story?
So, like we just said, it started as a short story prompt. I had just, I think, finished reading at the time Stephen King's 11/22/63, and I thought that was cool because it was horror-ish, but not really in his realm of horror, and it was all about time traveling back to prevent the assassination of JFK. And so I thought that was kind of an interesting idea. He always came out at the same point and the same time when he went in, so I thought it'd be neat to run with something like that. And in mine, I thought it doesn't have to be anywhere special, and David doesn't have to have a mission. But what if on the other side of the locked door was a world exactly like his, looked like a mirror world, but in different times? So sometimes it's the 1960s. Sometimes he comes out and the cottage that he summers in isn't even there anymore. It's crumbled. It's so old. And in all of these worlds, it's been raised of people by something that only comes out at night. And thought it'd be neat to explore what happened in these worlds and ride along with David as he tried to figure it out.
Yeah, definitely. So, and I'm definitely getting some of those Stephen King vibes, some kind of like Blake Crouch vibes with the time travel stuff. And did he always, because I think he kind of ends up having a mission or taking on a mission, kind of later in the book. Is that something that you had kind of planned ahead of time, or that kind of came out of as you were exploring the character in the story?
Probably a little bit of both. The last chapter of the book was always planned that way, and then
Okay.
afterwards, the epilogue it was a little bit extra. I'm like, well, what if it went a little further than what it said at the end of the story? So yeah, the end of the chapter, the last chapter of the book was always planned that way, but the epilogue was a little afterwards, going, hey, maybe this isn't the end.
Yeah, that's cool because I mean, it opens up like this whole other world, or hints at, right? All these other things. So, are you planning on writing other books in this universe?
I'd love to if it calls to me again, but right now I don't have any like firm ideas or
Okay.
outlines of what would happen to David. So for now, we just have to wonder, maybe down the road.
Yeah, very cool. So the character of David and the coming of age, kind of story that it is, and this crazy family that he has with all of these brothers, with really strong personalities, everybody, kind of except for David, the quiet one. Did you pull from any of your own family or friends or people when you're creating these characters?
Well, my parents both come from a really big family. My family's not big. I have a younger brother and a younger sister, but my mom came from a family of 7 kids, and my dad's family had 7 kids, and we were all really close with our aunts and uncles growing up. So a lot of our weekends were like 30, 40, 50 people, all your cousins and
Oh,
your aunts and uncles, and everyone would get
yeah.
together, and my poor grandmothers would be like making massive meals to feed hordes of people. So part of it came from there, the
Yeah.
inspiration of that. Of it just my childhood was a really fun one, growing up with a ton of siblings and a ton of aunts and uncles, and of
Mm.
course no one could watch you really closely when there was that many kids, so we just kind of took off and did whatever we wanted. It was really fun.
I can well imagine. Good Lord.
And
Yeah.
also when you hear with your parents when they have big families like that, like big families in that age when there wasn't cell phones or anything like that, you lost kids every now and then. Like you
I
couldn't
can
keep track
imagine.
with 7 of them, especially if one of them wanted to duck out of the house or sneak away. So part of that pulled on was when you have a big family like that, someone at some point is going to get lost. And the other part that I pulled on for golf was, I think we all have that like one pivotal moment in our lives that you never forget, where you got forgot somewhere or you got lost, and you looked up in a crowd in a mall or at a park and you're like, that's not my parents, and it sticks with
Yeah.
you. Most of us can be like, I remember what time mine was, and I thought, what kind of influence would that have on a kid or a teenager as they're growing up if that just kept happening? What would that do to their psyche?
Mhm,
Yep, I
mhm.
can well imagine that. Oh my goodness me. I'm the complete opposite. I'm an only child. My parents, they did have brothers and sisters, but not immediately where we were. Now I've only got one, child as well. So we're like this little tiny family. I can't even imagine all the hordes of brothers and sisters and cousins and stuff. It sounds awesome though. It makes me think of Home Alone, that scene where they're
Yes,
trying to check them off going to the
it's very
airport.
much
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that.
Awesome. Okay. So that kind of leads us into the fact that it is a coming of age story. So what made you decide to do that, write about a teenager, especially a boy teenager? And what was it like to go on your journey with David?
For me, I thought of and it's been a long time since I've been a teen, but I thought that when you're doing coming of age, a lot of your middle grade writing is they save the world, like Harry Potter sort of thing. That's,
Yeah.
we take it as young adult, but it's middle grade. It's like you can save the whole world. A lot of middle grade stories are like huge, vast. You can do it. You individually and your friends can save the entire world. And then as you get into YA writing, it shifts more and the stakes are lower. And it's interesting because it's kind of that realization as you're growing up that you're like, I don't know if I can save the whole world, or I'm more concerned of where I fit in this big world that I'm going to be thrust into soon. And me, I went through a phase as a teenager where you just kind of felt invisible. Like you still wanted to have this massive change in the world that you'd read about in all these middle grade books and seen in movies, but you weren't sure if you were the person that could do it. You kind of felt invisible. And so I thought, wouldn't it be cool if you took that concept to someone who's going through that stage in life and just literally made them invisible and made them have to save the world, and no one's going to know about it whether they do or not. So yeah, that's kind of where I got the idea to make it coming of age, because I think it's even more poignant that David is actually coming invisible at a point in life where a lot of us did feel invisible.
Yeah. And at what stage did you know that it was going to be horror? Because, well, like that could have been fantasy, like you said, like with it could have been a more teenage Harry Potter kind of thing. So what made you go more into the realms of horror rather than fantasy the way you'd written before?
Well, I think for mine, I wanted David to feel like he belonged on the other side of the world more than he belonged on his. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if the world he belonged to didn't have anyone in it? So in the world that's full of people and crowded, he feels like he doesn't fit in.
Yeah.
But the world that doesn't have anyone in it at all, he feels like he belongs. And it bothers him that he feels like he belongs in that world. So then it kind of went from there as to, okay, what could have happened to this world that just absolutely wiped everyone out? And so I thought, well, that'd be a really fun direction to go, and that really more suits horror than
Yeah.
fantasy or something like that.
Mm.
Um, and I wanted it to be something where what David is saving the world from is scary. Like it has the potential to destroy his world too, and he's the only one between the doorway to this other world and his own that these creatures on the other side that only come out at night want to devour.
Ooh, scary.
I know it's so creepy, and I was actually it's been a couple months since I've read it, and so I was kind of thinking back on it, and I was like, there's not really, it's not a lot of like in your face like scares and things like that. It's very much, I mean, he goes through the door back and forth a lot, but as far as like the monsters themselves or whatever's on the other side, like you don't really see them that much. It's just the pounding on the door and the claws and everything, and yet it's so creepy. It's so well written, I guess, right? Well paced, the atmosphere, everything. It's quite terrifying without even really showing much, which I really enjoyed. And that kind of, I wanted to ask you because I saw you just describing the book as quiet horror. So what that term means to you, and how you think this fits into that, I guess, subgenre.
I think you really nailed it. What I was going for with golf was almost like as kids we watched, and it was older stuff. Some of the old like Alfred Hitchcock series and stuff like that, where a lot of it was left to your imagination to scare you, where the idea was what you could come up with in your own head was creepier than anything that someone could describe on the page. So I thought I kind of wanted to play with that a bit. And the unknown is always kind of a little bit more scary. So I thought
Yeah.
keep on pushing back the reveal of what these monsters actually look like, and until the very end, because it's scary if you can just imagine it in your head. And I think for me, yeah, quiet horror for me is a lot of like character building first, make you care about these people, make you maybe almost forget for a bit you're reading a horror and you're like, oh, it's going to turn out all right for them. And before you're like, no, it's not. I think I just finished reading Heart Strange and Dreadful by Tim McGregor, and he does a really good job, and I don't know if I'd describe that as quiet horror, but he does a really good job in the first few chapters of making you think like, things are going to turn out okay. And you know you're reading a horror, you know it's not going to turn out okay, but he really convinces you for a bit there going like, it's going to be all right here. Things are looking up. So for me, that's kind of a quiet horror thing. You go into it and you know you're supposed to be reading a horror, but you're like, it's not going to be that bad. And then start kicking up the pace a bit so that there's a bit more of a contrast between where you started and where you end. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I never knew like, a locked door could be so scary. And then the idea of an unlocked door or an open door, right?
Especially because the door in David's is it's an addition to the cabin or the cottage that they've rented, and the person made the addition behind where the closet was. So it's just this like rickety old closet door that has like a skeleton key lock. It's not meant to hold anything back. So that was
so fragile. Even though they end up boarding it, all this kind of stuff to try to reinforce, it's so fragile, and them breaking or trying to break through it's terrifying. When you're writing it though, because it is the quiet horror and the moments, the scares are maybe kind of spread out, I guess, a little bit more. And you did spend more time, with the family and their kind of relationships and dynamics and stuff like that. Did you have any concerns when you were writing it, just kind of like with pacing, or how did you, since you were going to be kind of moving away from scares for a while, what was that like, kind of writing all that out?
I did have some concerns with that, especially because it's my debut horror and I'm new to horror. So which is fun because I'm like a kid in the horror candy store. I'll read a book and be like, oh my gosh, have you all heard about this? And they're like, yeah, Shelly, that's been around forever. And so,
I love that saying, kid in a horror candy store. That is a brilliant saying. Sorry.
But yeah, so being like newer to horror myself and not having read like a ton of horror in the horror genre. I mean, we read some Stephen King and he's like the gateway for everyone for horror, but a lot of my other reading is like science fiction and fantasy and things like that. I have a love for those genres too. But I was really scared debuting with golf because I'm like, have I even hit the mark here? Are people going to be into this or not? Is this horror? When I was first subbing golf, I didn't even know whether to sub it to horror presses or not. I couldn't figure out where it would belong because it's a little bit more quiet. It's not in your face gore or like splatterpunk or anything like that. But it's not like fantasy. It's a bit more grim and a bit more supernatural than even my grimdark fantasy stuff is. So yeah, I was definitely worried. I'm like, I don't know if people are going to be into it or if the pacing's going to be too slow for people. Or if it's just going to fall right off the mark because I'm not super familiar with my audience in horror yet.
Yeah. Well,
see, I think that's almost a blessing in a way, because it must be so fresh for you, whereas a lot of us that have read horror since we were, tiny, and that's all our kind of life is. Everything that you write, you're almost thinking, oh crap, has this been done before? And sort of like you're trying to make sure that you of course you're influenced by things, and you're trying to make sure it's not like a blatant copy of something and all of that. So for you were kind of just going in with fresh eyes as well, and everything was Shelley's idea rather than, oh, I might have nicked that from Dean Koontz or Hunter Shea or something. And I think that's the other beauty of horror, is like you say, it might not be splatterpunky and whatnot, but horror is so vast. There's so many subgenres within it. And I think for a lot of us, things like extreme horror, splatterpunk, creature features, they're good fun, but they're probably not going to scare you because it is so in your face and whatnot. They're almost like, a lot of splatterpunk almost has that kind of humor side to it as well, because it's so bloody and gory and gratuitous and all that kind of stuff. But with something like yours, that's what creeps under your skin. That's what keeps you awake at night, looking at your own door, thinking, I'm not sure now. And I think that even a lot of us like gore hounds really appreciate the fact when somebody can scare you that much with something like yours. I think it takes a lot of talent to be able to do that.
Oh, thank you. A lot of luck, I think, on my part too.
Yeah.
And a lot of really good critique partners and publishers who are willing to take a chance. And yeah, it's always a lot of luck thrown in there in the road of publishing.
Okay, let's have a look. So we've talked obviously about that your debut was fantasy. So for you, how do you feel that the two genres overlap? What are the similarities between horror and fantasy? And is there anything that is very much that's horror, that's fantasy? How do things fit in with you?
I think a lot of the fantasy stuff, when people think fantasy, they think, of course, like Lord of the Rings and epic journey stuff. There's a group of people, they're going somewhere. It's a large cast. The stakes are massive and huge. There's magic and there's big wars and stuff like that. The fantasy I write is more grimdark fantasy, and I can't remember the author that described it, but I was on a panel once and an author described the difference between grimdark fantasy and fantasy is in fantasy there can be these massive battles like they are with Lord of the Ring, or you can have huge, horrible injuries, but then magic just heals it. They never concentrate on what happens after the battle and how many people died, or what are the consequences of those injuries, or do people get infections, whereas Grimdark focuses a little bit more on what are the consequences of you doing that magic? What's the consequences of that big battle? So a little bit more, I don't want to say realistic, but it explores like the darker side of, okay, what happens if you do that? What are the consequences? So I think there's a similarity there to horror, because with grimdark fantasy you're exploring like the darker side of things as well. My grimdark fantasy is about a tribal society that worships a goddess, and they think her dragons are angels, and when the dragons start going extinct, they start making human sacrifices to her because they're desperate to get these dragons back. They used to lead them to hunting grounds and away from storms, and they're not doing it anymore, and the people think their goddess is ignoring them. So it all stemmed from just what would happen if these dragons went extinct and the people thought they were tied to their deity, and kind of like ties back to like stuff like Mayan culture, where when as floods or famine in that case came, people got more and more and more desperate to win back their god. So in the like maybe an epic fantasy journey, it would have been journeying to find this god and like maybe talk to them face to face, but it was grimdark, so it's more exploring how dark would people get, how much would they sacrifice to learn this. So I think there's a similarity there for sure to horror, and all of my stuff that I've written always has a little bit of a touch of the darker side in it anyway, so it wasn't that big of a move to me for horror. Yeah. And I think on the horror side of things, there can be some magic, but it's more like the supernatural side of things, where it's the scary stuff. Where did our myths come from? What scared us back in the days when we were prehistoric cavemen and it was getting like eaten by something, someone you love killed, getting dragged away or dismembered? Those are all like natural human fears that we've had since the beginning of time, tied to a lot of our myths. There's monsters out there. There's something way bigger than you, that sort of thing. So I kind of tend to tie horror a lot more to a lot of your myths that you see out there, where people were trying to explain what they didn't know about the world, and it scared them.
Yeah, definitely. That's it. Yeah, it's our inner fears, isn't it? And our very real fears. That's why a lot of I mean, all three of us are parents, so one of the most real fears that we can have is something happening, obviously, to our children. Something like that. How far would you go to save your, and I'm late in the party to it, but I've just read Crossroads by Laurel Hightower.
So good.
I mean, I adore Laurel as a person anyway, so I knew it was going to be amazing, but I read it all just over 24 hours it took me to read it, and I sat when I finished it and I was like, whoa.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
What journey! I was
She did,
exhausted just from reading it.
she did an incredible job on that for sure. And I remember I read it too. And we have in the town that I live in, unfortunately, there was a lady who her son was like 16 or 17 and got killed by a drunk driver. And
Oh
she
my
feels
goodness.
more at home sitting by the cross on the side of the road than she does going to his gravesite. And she still lived in town. And this has happened like 2, 3 years ago. So you often see her at the side of the road and wave and stuff. And it totally, as soon as I started reading Laurel's Crossroads, it was like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, it hit
Oh,
close to home for that reason too. Yeah.
definitely. Yeah.
And I
So
guess
that, sorry.
Crossroads kind of fits into that quiet horror as well, because it's very much, character focused and the psychological stuff and all of that. And it's not outright scary, but there's that dread underneath and everything. So, and
Yeah.
when you were talking about when you were explaining, the grim dark fantasy, the way that you're explaining that, I was kind of seeing some connections to your, how you wrote Gulf as well, as far as it's more focused on what are the consequences for the characters. Yeah, there's things trying to get in, and there is that action there, but David's constantly like, here's what would happen if they got through, and trying to, and the consequences of him fading away, and not being listened to, and all of that, and kind of the psychological stuff. So I don't know. I was just thinking about there's kind of a little bit of like kind of overlap in that way, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And I know that world building's a massive thing within fantasy, isn't it? And I've heard that I was looking at some reviews before we came on, and a lot of people have praised Golf for that as well. The fact that you take that time developing your characters and world building, so that's another skill that transpires over from the fantasy side of thing as well, which is something that puts me off about fantasy. Not that I don't like fantasy, but trying to write it, because it almost seems as though that you need, and I'm a real pantser as well, half the time I write a story and I have no idea where it's going, no idea I'm as surprised at the end as anybody else. And you can't do that in fantasy. You have to know your worlds and your characters and everything, because you've just got so much to do. So yeah, I can say it's a definite skill that transposes over the two genres, definitely. Is there any horror subgenre that you are really like looking forward to trying, something that it might be a bit different for you?
I'm probably gonna stick to the same kind of style. Um, Again, because most of my stories are really based on character building. Because I think if I can't make you care about them, you're not going to care about what happens to them next, sort of
Oh
thing.
yeah.
So I have to work on my pacing. If I could tackle something that was faster paced, like right from the get-go, that would be fun, because that would be out of my wheelhouse for sure. Is something where you don't get a lot of time to make people care about these characters. How are you going to make people care if you don't have a lot of time to do it? So it'd be fun to explore something that was faster paced than what I usually write, and that pulls people in faster, and explore how do you do that when you don't have time, when you're more worried about pacing this really high from the start and then going from there. How do you make it even more? How do you keep up that pace?
Yeah.
So that would be fun.
Do you ever fancy some splatterpunk or something like that, or is that just not your cup of tea?
I like reading it and watching it. I don't know if I'd be much good at writing it. There's just so many people that are better at it than I am, for sure. But yeah, it's one of those things that like I appreciate, and I like reading it, and I like watching movies on it. But I'm like, I'm not the best at that. Too much of a softie. I'm like, what is the axe thinker? What is the axe murderer thinking right now?
Yeah.
What led him to this point? What was his family life like that made this happen? So probably not be the best person.
You should have been an FBI profiler. That's
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
See, whereas I'm like, I kind of, because of my police background, I quite often have those kind of thoughts as well. But I'm just like, bring on the blood. Yeah. I just have, when I write splattery stuff, I just have so much fun with it. I was like, oh, forget about the background and stuff. I know all of that. I just want as much blood as possible. How can I disembowel the next person?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Over to you, Ben.
So when I was doing my, I guess, research, I use that term lightly, but I did, and I was looking at your site and some of your other things, right, and seeing that you're also an artist. as well, and really good. And so when you were coming up with, when they were creating the cover for the book and kind of that process and everything, what was that like working with Silver Shamrock and Keelan Patrick Burke on all that?
It was fun. It's always scary going in with a new publisher because you don't know if they're going to give you any input at all in
Yeah.
covers or not. It could be you get lots of input. It could be you're like, no, this is what it is and this is what it is. You sign the contract, be happy with it. So coming into it, it was nice. I got an email from Ken or a message from Ken saying, would you have any thoughts on what you'd like for a cover? And I'd said, I have like this placeholder on my website that was literally just like some weird public domain photo of a tree in reflection in the water, and then my text over it, just like the worst ever. And it said just temporary placeholder for the cover for golf coming soon. I said, I kind of have this. I like this idea. And I like kind of like misty or muted colors because it's quieter. You don't know what's in the background. But I said, but I'd really like the something on it to pop, like the title, totally different color, a nice contrasting color. And Keelan rolled with it and came up with that spectacular cover. And yeah, I was probably a little bit worried going in because I've never had a horror cover.
Yeah.
And I like fantasy and sci-fi
Yeah.
and stuff like that. And so it was, again, like the new thing was like, what am I even stepping in here? Am I going to get something that I really love, or is it going to be like, that's fantastic, but it's not my cup of tea? And ended up, yeah, of course, Keelan Patrick Burke is incredible. Cover design and writing and it's pretty much anything he tackles, I think.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, just absolutely nailed it. It was like, yes, that's amazing. That's exactly what was in my head. So I was really lucky. Yeah, I got a lot of input and they came up with a cover that was just better than anything I could have come up with. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's a really cool cover.
It is a really cool cover. And the thing I love so much about them as well, I've got my one too here, is obviously the pictures inside as well with the
interior
that's
ones.
just
Yeah,
so awesome.
my sister said it reminded her of like Goosebumps.
Yeah.
Yeah, a
And
little
I'm like,
bit,
yeah, like why can't we have Goosebumps for adults? We can still have cool pictures in our books and stuff like that too. So yeah, I love that about Silver Shamrock, the illustrations that they do.
With your own art, have you thought about doing some kind of illustrations for books or covers or anything like that? Probably more in
I
the fantasy
have.
world, I guess.
When I subbed for Under the Lesser Moon, I said,
Yeah.
"Would you be interested? Like, could I put my hat in the ring for designing something for the cover?" And they're like, "Yeah, sure, but we're also gonna sub it out to some other cover artists and pick what we like best." And I find cover art is such a different skill set than just any regular traditional art because you have to be a marketer for cover art. You have to know what sells. You have to know what fonts to use and be like, "Papyrus is out." It always, that sort of thing. Don't use that. And placement and how to catch eyes and how is it going to look really good as a tiny thumbnail when you're shopping for stuff. How's it going to stand out, but still how's it going to fit in? So when we picked the cover for Under the Lesser Moon, same thing. They're like, yeah, sure, try your hand at it. And then what the cover artist that they used there came up with was much better than what I can come up with. I've got the cover here for it, and yeah, they did a pretty good job on it.
Ooh.
Nothing I could come up with for sure. But we had considered putting interior art because I do a lot of character art for the
Yeah.
characters for Under the Lesser Moon. And because of COVID times, they wouldn't send author proofs up to Canada, Amazon. And my publishing company for Under the Lesser Moon, Mythos and Ink, hadn't ever done any published books with illustrations in them before. And they were worried about how they would turn out. So we ended up going like, no, at last minute going, if we can't see a proof of what it's even going to look like before we put the illustrations in, then we're not going to be able to do it. But we have talked about like when the sequel for Under the Lesser Moon comes out, doing like
Yeah.
a special anniversary edition first book with character art in it, which would be really cool.
Definitely, yeah.
Do you do that anyways? Just kind of like when you're, working on a book or characters, do you kind of sketch them out? Do you have drawings just for yourself? Do you do that for fun or not so much?
I do a lot of the time, especially when you're on sub for something, because if the well has gone dry for writing, then it's like, okay, well, then I want to draw out these characters and things like that.
Mhm.
Especially with the fantasy stuff too, because if for me, if I've got a creature like a dragon, or in Under the Lesser Moon, there's these creatures called Vayas. They use them like pack animals, but they look like this prehistoric terror bird. They're like reptilian looking with a big beak, and they can talk like parrots. But I have to draw that out to see it. Like, how would a person fit on that? How would they ride them? What would a dragon look like when it was flying? I can't visualize it. So for me to be able to write well about it, I have to see it on paper for some of that stuff. And even for like David I didn't draw at all because David's invisible. And I don't know if you noticed in the book, but there's never any physical description of David at all. You don't get his eye color or hair color. Or I think it maybe says that he wore jeans at one point, and that's about as
Yeah.
much as you get out of David. So I didn't draw him because I thought it'd be cool if he's invisible to not even think about what he looked like.
That's
But I
real.
did do like a layout of what the cabin looks like. Where are the rooms in the cabin? What's the floor plan of even this little cabin? Because I can't see stuff if I don't put it down. And I think art for me is really fun as an alternative kind of project to writing, because
Yeah.
writing's like so long term. You're like, by the time this is published, I'll have read it 100 times and almost be sick of it. And everyone's like, whoa, this is new. And I'm like, no, it's not. It's been, I'm kind of done with it now, sort of thing. And it's like that long road, and then a lot of built up and then gratification at the end. Whereas art's like instant gratification of the creative world. You can be done a sketch in like a half an hour. You can be done like a really complicated painting in a couple of weeks, and it's done. And you're still excited about it. So they kind of complement each other. If I want like that instant gratification, I go to drawing. And if I'm setting up something for a more longer term, that's going to be a bigger win at the end of it all, then writing's really fun for that.
That's really cool. I wish I could draw, because sometimes I'll be like doodling something to do with mine, and I'll look at it afterwards and I'll be like, what the hell was that supposed to be? I'm terrible, absolutely terrible at drawing. So I sort of envy, because a lot of people within the writing community have this amazing creative flair, which they seem to be able to play. They can play guitar, and they can sing, and they can draw, and they can write, and I'm like, I can't do any of that. I can write, but no, well, I'm never going to be singing any of my stories or drawing anything. I'll save that to the professionals.
I've read a book. It's called Drawing from the Right Side of the Brain, I think it's called. And this lady teaches art in school, and she says she can peg by looking at a drawing that you've done when you gave up on drawing, what age you were. She can tell.
Wow.
And she's like, it's just like writing. It's like handwriting or like cursive. It's not a talent, it's a skill. And if anyone practices it, they can do it. But she says people get frustrated with it because like the left side of your brain tells you all four legs on a chair are the same length, and the seat is the biggest part. So we'll draw the seat super big and all four legs the same length. And it'll say when we're drawing people, the eyes and the nose and the mouth, that's the most important, because that's how you recognize people. So you'll draw them way too big when you draw, because the left side of your brain's arguing with the right side of your brain saying, no, this is the part that's important. Chair legs are the same length. People's faces, the eyes, the features matter. And then we get really frustrated when we look at it and be like, this doesn't look right. So it was a really cool book about that. It's a skill people can do, and how to like disassociate the logical side of your brain and say, no, don't draw it the way you think it should look.
That's really interesting, because I'm not too bad at copying. So if I've got a picture next to me, so for example, we're massive Disney fans, so sometimes my daughter and I will sit down and we'll draw Disney characters. If I have the Disney character in front of me, we've got like art books of like Walt's like actual sketches and things, I can copy it, and it won't be brilliant, but it won't be terrible. But if I've just got a piece of paper, and then and I'm trying to draw just like from it'll be like exactly like you say, like Mickey's nose will be like out here kind of thing, and it'll just be all out of proportion, and I'll be like, what? No, that's a horror story right there. That's actually real. And I would have said it was the exact opposite, that drawing is a talent that you can't teach art. I didn't know any of that kind of thing. So
It's a really interesting read. It goes through like what's going through your mind or reading. So yeah, I had fun with that one. And then at the end of the book, it's got like before and afters of people who have been through her art course. So it's a little bit of a sales pitch, but then you're like, there's people that it looks like they're 12 years old when they drew that, and then 4 weeks later, it's like this instead. But yeah, it's fun.
Cool.
I use a lot of references too. So I hear you there, Janine. I use a lot of references. Not a ton of stuff in my art comes out of my head. It's references to a lot of pictures.
It's the easiest way, I think. Okay, who are some of your favorite writers and how have they influenced your work? So not, I mean, obviously we're looking at horror and whatnot, but they don't have to be horror writers, you know. We pull in from all different genres and whatnot. So who are some people that you can say have influenced the way that you work?
Probably back in the high school days, I was really into like Anne McCaffrey and Dragon Riders of Pern, so that probably inspired a lot of my fantasy stuff. I like how she had dragons in her books for a reason. They had a need for each other, so it was almost like this symbiotic relationship. So I thought with mine, well, that'd be cool to play with. What if they need each other? There's a reason why they exist, and if one goes extinct, the other one's in trouble. And playing with how there's dragons in just about every human myth, no matter where you live in the world. Probably because they found fossilized dinosaur bones and things that looked quite snake-like when it was just this giant spine left. So that probably played into it. As far as horror, like you said, I haven't read a lot of it yet, so it's new to me. But I read Stephen Graham Jones, The Only Good Indians. And again, everyone's like, yeah, we've all read that. but I was like, oh my gosh. So people like that have been a big inspiration recently. And then probably for me, I read a lot of my critique partners' work, and they're finding some success in the publishing world now too. So we're a huge inspiration, I think, to each other. And like you said, you don't want to pull off each other's style, but you'll read each other's work and be like, oh, they do that so well, and they do this so well, and I want to be able to write like that when it comes to like world building or pacing or describing scenery. So probably a lot of my critique partners right now are a big inspiration to me writing wise, even though we're maybe not big names out there just yet.
Oh, and you don't have to be at all, not at all. Some of the people that I like draw my inspiration from are indie writers as well, you know, that are kind of like they're more established, but definitely they're not kind of like the Stephen Kings and whatnot. But and I think that well, you're just saying that it's not like you're copying each other. We use because I've worked in a school as well, and we use this term called magpieing, where the kids will all like say their different ideas for something, and then they pick the ideas off each other. So the teachers always refer to it as you're not copying, you're magpieing that idea. And I think that we do that as adults as well. Like you'll read something, like I'll read a story or watch a movie, and I'll think that's an amazing idea. Obviously, I'm not going to do that, but I'm going to put my own spin on it and whatnot. But that's like the genesis for it. That's, you know, that's the origin for that, and then you breathe your own kind of air into it. And if you're able to do that with like your contemporaries, you know, people that and you're all finding your own feet together and whatnot, I think that's fantastic. That's what critique partners are for as well. How did you find that group of people that you do that with?
It was totally by chance to start with. I was on like a beta reading group in Facebook that had like 30 or 40,000 members, and then found one writer on there and did a writer swap with her, and ended up being the first book she read for me was Under the Lesser Moon, and the first book I read for her was No Feck Gloss, which ended up getting published with Orbit. So it was fun. They were both like, again, similar to golf, they're both like boys that terrible things have happened to, coming of age, alone, trying to find family, sort of thing. So I found her, and that really liked her story and shared. And then she said, "Hey, we have this other group that's just like the 10 of us of critique partners we've pulled together that we've really found and loved from these larger online groups. Do you want to come and join the group?" So I was lucky enough to hop on board with them, and there's about a dozen of us in the group, and yeah, just a really good group. And it's hard to find because you have to find people that you're not friends first for critique partners, because if your friends are reading your work, then they're like, it's great, I loved it, you know, they're not going to tell you anything. So you have to be people that you're not afraid to be like,
Need the honesty.
That's
Yeah.
garbage. You
Yep.
can do better
Yeah.
than that. Take this out. What if you did this instead? And
Yeah.
know that you've got not thick enough skin, but know that you know each other well enough that you're taking it as helpful advice. And plus, there is
Yes.
some beta readers out there, if you don't know each other, aren't helpful at all, right? Like
Yeah.
someone reads this and offers you 2 lines on a whole novel, or just doesn't even read in your genre
Yeah.
and just hates it because they hate the genre. So it was really nice to find out of this huge crowd of beta readers a connection with a bunch of us and we all write slightly different genres, but just found a connection in your writing and love reading each other's stuff and getting your hands on it first and making it the best it could be. So yeah, really lucked out there with them.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. When we talked to another Silver Shamrock writer, Russell James, a few weeks ago, he said the same kind of thing. I seem to recall,
Yeah.
Ben, if you can remember as well, that he had this group of people that he'd been with for years.
Yep.
And I think one of the ladies in the group was like a quite a well-known children's writer or something like that. So again, they didn't have to be like all kind of like the same, you know, we all write dark horror and we all do this, we all do that. It's actually quite nice to have that slight differences, and then they could and be able to bounce those ideas off each other is just it's amazing, and it is so helpful. It's like with networking, it's like the horror community in general, you know. And I know that everybody has their own opinions on bits and pieces, and there's fractions where people have complaints and whatnot, but as a general rule, I found the horror community to be so welcoming and helpful. And for me, when I was putting my debut collection out, if I hadn't have already made all these connections and known all these people, especially because I self-published by choice, but I did that, I wouldn't you know, I would have had a handful of sales maybe. But because I knew these people and I've put myself, you know, out to help them before and do stuff, it really is just the best thing that you can have, just knowing that you've got people that have got your back and behind you and everything. Of course, you've got the advantage with Silver Shamrock as well, being just one of the you know, I think one of the best indie presses out there anyway, but a lot of people know of them. Okay, they're not big five, but they're not that far behind, I think, for like popularity of just people being like, Silver Shamrock. Oh, you know, if I scroll through something and I see the words published by Silver Shamrock, 9 times out of 10 I'll buy it, even if I don't know the author particularly, because I know Ken only accepts the best.
Yeah, he's done a fantastic job. It's amazing the amount of quality work that they're pumping out and how many authors they're giving a good home to. So yeah, it's like I said, I feel like I'm, you know, typical writer's imposter syndrome. I feel like I'm like, I slipped in the side door here somehow and I'm along for the ride and no one's caught me yet. That sort of thing. So yeah, I'm really lucky to be a part of it.
Judging from the 4 and 5 star reviews that you've got, I don't think you slipped in the door. They were lucky to find you.
So is there anything, any upcoming stories, projects, anything like that that you're working on that you're able to tell us about?
Yeah, we got a bunch of stuff coming down the line. Unfortunately, not a lot of it horror right now, but that'll come. I'm working on the sequel to Under the Lesser Moon, so it's a duology, my grimdark fantasy. It's out this November, so that's nice for people that don't want to get bogged down by a huge series like fantasy can sometimes be. This is just 2 books, so and then it's coming out in November. And then I'm also working with Alison Alexander. We're writing a field guide to world building for science fiction and fantasy, so it's kind of like a nonfiction guide for writers, and that's been a riot because it forces me to do research to be a better writer. It's like I have to get good at this because I'm writing articles on it and chapters on it. I also forget really easy, so it's going to be a kind of book that I'll like page through and wear it right out because I won't remember anything that I wrote down for advice to others. And then I'm on sub right now. I'm co-wrote a book with a friend of mine, and the main character in the book has ADHD, and my friend has ADHD as well, and has always wanted to write this idea, but isn't a writer. So I'm like, let's write it together. So I used her a lot as like a sensitivity person because I'm like, I don't know what's going on in this main character's head. You do, sort of thing. And it's a post-apocalyptic book, based kind of in Canada in the apocalypse, and solar flares have knocked out the electrical grids. And the solar flares just keep coming. So eventually, the world is pretty quickly without internet or electricity. And it's been some time, about 15, 20 years since that happened. And she lives in a commune that scavenges internet from information from the internet. So they're pulling information and files off of caches and old home computers that they find. And they're scribing it all back onto paper because so much information was lost that was digital and no one else had it. And they're selling it. So knowledge is kind of like currency, but they've been doing it for about 15 years and they're running out of good information to sell. And some of their neighbors are looking to, predatory kind of neighbors are looking to take over. So that one's been fun to write and sub out.
Yeah.
Sounds awesome.
Mm. Cool. Okay. And do you do short stories at all?
I've only done one or two. The only one I have published out there is by Electric Spec. They're an online magazine, so anyone can go read it for free. And if you look up Electric Spec and my name, and it was about a centaur in the time of Alexander the Great in what would have been Ireland. So I took the take on it that centaurs and other mythical creatures, you could hire them on as like mercenary soldiers for your armies. So it was
cool.
the life of a mercenary soldier centaur.
I like the sound of that. That sounds cool.
Cool, yeah.
Yeah. Is that something that you think you would like to try and develop more, or like short stories, or are you going to stay in the novel kind of length, do you think?
I do. I love short stories. I've subbed to a couple of horror anthologies out there, so we'll see where that goes. And I'm sure once I get enough stories under my belt, eventually one will get in there. I love short stories for the same reason I love art. It's that instant gratification. You're done soon, and you can only concentrate on like this one scene. You have to accomplish this. You have to get them to know and love this character and root for them, but you only have so many words to do that. So I have a lot of fun with that. It's just whereas a novel, you can describe a whole world. Usually in a story, short story, it's just you only got this one scene or this one place or this one little spot of time. So I love that and would love to write more of them. Yeah.
I do. Yeah. A lot of people say that it's easier to write a novel than it is a short story, because you've almost got every single factor of your novel, but just in like 5,000 words kind of thing. So actually trying to get your beginning, your middle, your end, building some kind of journey for your character and all that kind of stuff, but in such a small amount of words, it's quite a skill set to be able to do that as well.
Yeah, I have a hard time keeping the words down. All mine end up long and I have to keep cutting and cutting and cutting.
I'm the opposite. I think I must have a really awful attention span, because I think the longest story I've ever written topped out about like 6.5 or something like that. I just cannot, no matter how much I do, I just can't make mine any longer. It's terrible.
We all come at it from different angles, hey? I have a friend of mine who's an amazing, like, at flash fiction, and I can't do flash fiction at all. I so admire people who can, just this little blurb, and like, how do you get someone to care about and tell the story in like less than a paragraph? And yeah, they're incredible at it. Definitely that one's out of my wheelhouse. That's too short for me to be able to accomplish anything in.
I use, as I said earlier, I use drabbles and flash fiction almost just as exercises. So it might never be, I mean, I do sub them out sometimes, but sometimes it's just for me. It's just for a bit of practice, you know, like I just, I haven't done anything for a few days. Maybe I'll just write this quick 100-piece, 100-word horror kind of thing. And it just gets the mind going and whatnot. So they can be really good for practice and things like that as well. Or just like I just want to write about one character, so I'm just going to do 100 words on that character and see what comes out of it. But they are some drabbles you read and you just can't fathom how this person's managed to tell, like 100-page story in 100 words. It's amazing.
And like pull emotion out of you and get you invested in it when it's just 100 words. That always, it seems a bit magical to me.
If it's magic and you do your fantasy, you should be able to do it.
Yeah, we were doing an example assignment recently in the classes that I was teaching, high school English, and how to get so much out of so little. And so we were looking at examples of like 2-sentence stories. on the internet, or like, Hemingway's 6-word story and some of those kinds of things. And so just kind of playing around with that, how to get a lot from a little. And they're like, it's so hard. It is. It
Yeah.
It
is.
is. Yep.
Um, and do you find this, kind of going back a little bit, but popped in my head, you mentioned the idea for Gulf, the short story, kind of came from a writing prompt. And then this post-apocalyptic, is your friend that wanted to write this. And so for you, for inspiration, and I'm sure art and everything, is there kind of, when you're like, I'm ready to write, or I want to write something, are there certain places you go for inspiration, or where does that kind of come from?
For mine, it kind of pops into my head. I have gone onto like some online. I'm on Discord with Mythos and Ink, my publisher. They run a little Discord site, and one of them is just like a writing prompt. If you just press the button on that channel, it comes up with some writing prompt. And I haven't used them yet, but they've come up with some interesting ones that are even really cool for horror. So one of the ones that stuck with me that I was like, "Woo, this would be a good idea," was you walked in the door and death casually says, "You're late," and then, and I was
Ooh.
like, "That's
Yeah.
cool."
Yeah.
So something like
Yeah.
that. So I probably would the more like the one-line things kind of inspire
Yeah.
me. So if I
Yeah.
do go looking, it would probably just be like the random prompt generators and just keep clicking until there's something that looks cool. And I'm hoping I get something the creative well going again for horror, because it's been a really fun journey and really incredible with Silver Shamrock, and it's been fun to see Golf getting well received and being like, okay, yeah, maybe I can do this sort of thing. And yeah, it's just like you were saying, Janine, it's just such a lovely community I've found so far.
Yeah. Because we're all in the same boat, I think, whether we're readers, writers, reviewers, a lot of us have our, like our fingers in many pies as well, and we all kind of like overlap and everything. But I think for the most part, because most of us are indie as well, we know what it's like to support each other. That support is absolutely invaluable, because we haven't got even with indie presses behind you, it's still very much word of mouth and all that kind of stuff. You're not going to switch on the TV and see a Silver Shamrock advert, as much as Ken would love to do it, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So it does all, involve us kind of like doing things like this. Ben and I putting this on both of our channels, kind of thing. We're getting extra exposure for you, and Ben's a reviewer, obviously, and dabbling in all of his writing and editing stuff. Obviously, I'm a writer as well, so we both know how important it is to help you guys. And I think that most of us do that as well within the community. We're there, yes, it's a competition in some ways, but for most of us, we don't see it like that. We just see it as sharing and supporting and promoting, and we all help each other. As I say, I've only been writing for a while, but the things that I've learned from some of the guys like Glenn Rolfe and Hunter Shea and whatnot, I now pass that on to the newer writers that are coming in. It's that kind of paying it forward. And I don't know everything by a long stretch of the imagination, but the things that those people have passed down to me, I've been lucky enough to have long conversations with like Brian Keane and people like that, and the stuff that they've told me, I'm not then keeping it and thinking like, oh, that's mine, I'm going to keep that to myself. I now tell other, the new people that come through as well, and like, this is what I learned and whatnot. Being able to pass on that knowledge as well, it's invaluable within the community, definitely.
I think that's the wonderful side of social media is
Yes.
before a lot of social media and writing, it was so whisper network everywhere. Like you never heard anything. You never knew what it was like to sub to someone. Good luck trying to find an indie publisher to sub for, because all you could buy was like, remember like the writers market, like the big chunky that just had the list of publishers in them. And by the
Oh
time you
yeah.
bought it, half of them were not even in existence anymore, right? Like
Yeah.
it was tough. It would feel like really lonely back then, and
Yeah.
people didn't talk about it, what it was like to sub. They didn't talk about what it was like to be a writer or share any tips or stuff like that. You could buy maybe some books, but now I find writers and even a lot of the publishers, the indie publishers, they're so open. They're so much more open.
Yes.
They're like, yeah, we'll help, or go here to get help, and it's a lot easier to get into it and to get help or find support than back in the day when when it seemed to be a little bit more, you don't talk about this sort of thing, right?
Definitely, that is, yeah, it's so true. It's so transparent. So I'm an editor as well over at Candisha Press. We're a women-only press, and I had a message from another publisher the other day, who had received a manuscript which they absolutely loved, but wasn't right for that particular press. And so rather than just like telling that person to go away or whatnot, he actually reached out and said, is this something that you can take for your press? Because I'm so impressed with her. I'd love to be able to help. It's not right for us. So this guy was actually reaching out to other presses and publishers and editors to see if they could take it. Now, we couldn't take it at Candisha either because we only put out anthologies at the moment. But immediately I was like, oh, well, we can't. But actually, what about so and so and so and so? And I think that that's another thing, all these different presses and editors and publishers, because we're such a small community, we all know each other and we're all willing to help each other out. So if you receive a manuscript or you're speaking to someone and it's blown your socks off, but it's not for you, it's not something your press deals with, or you just can't take on something else at the moment, you happily pass it on to someone else rather than it being like, oh, it's all a big secret and behind closed doors and nobody knows how anybody does anything. And it's just so helpful. And it just, I think sometimes when you come into the community as a newer person as well, it's like being the new kid at the table at school and being like, I don't know who to sit with because you're all the cool kids and whatnot. But it's just not like that. Once you start talking to people, hopefully it doesn't seem too cliquey. Most of us are really kind of like, hi, come and join us at our table.
Oh, that's totally what I found so far. In any of the writing circles that I'm in, horror or otherwise, is how helpful people are because they've been there and because they've had someone else help them too, sort of thing.
Yeah, definitely. Wonderful. Okay, Shelley, is there anything that we haven't touched on that you would just like to share with all our millions of viewers? Or tens of viewers, but
They're wonderful tens of viewers. I can't think of anything else to share. I've pretty much shared out.
Where can people find you? Where's the best place for people to interact with you?
I'm on Twitter at Shelly C Fine Art. My website is www.shellycampbellauthorandart.com. Instagram, Shelly Campbell Fine Art, and Facebook, Shelly Campbell Author and Art. Apparently, I just couldn't pick the same tags for everything and just had to make it hard. But yeah, on all of those. Probably Instagram's more art-related stuff a lot of the time. There's not a ton of the book stuff on there. And Twitter is more writer-related stuff. And website's just a mix of it all.
Awesome. And we'll make sure that I put a link to your Amazon page and things like that as well. Okay, well, thank you ever so much for chatting with us today. It's been really nice getting to know you a bit more, and hopefully lots and lots of people are going to watch this and then they're going to pick this up and join all those 4- and 5-star reviews we keep seeing over on Goodreads. So thank you ever so much, and just wish you loads and loads of luck for everything that you're putting up for the future as well.
Oh, thank you both so much for having me. It was awesome.
Thank you. You're very welcome. Okay. Bye.